Hey, Adam here from realworldworship.org. It's a blog website devoted to equipping worship leaders from everyday average churches who are doing extraordinary things for the kingdom of God and for worship ministry. I wanted to talk on this video about this question of why do worship players have such nice gear, or the stereotype of such nice gear. And before I get into why, because I do think there is a why, it's the rejecting of the premise a little bit. The average guy playing music in a church doesn't necessarily have nicer gear than anyone else. The stereotype for that is perpetuated because of Instagram, YouTube, where who gets the most attention? Guys who do have a lot of nice gear. And so those are the guys that people point to. It doesn't mean that that's how the average gal or guy who's playing in a church operates. That just means that's who's getting all the attention. Now, that being said, I do think you have to understand a little bit about how music economics works. If you are just starting out, you're in your late teens, early 20s, you're in a small band, but you're playing in clubs, you're doing house shows, you're trying to make it, you are not making money, your stuff is actually like under threat of being stolen, all that kind of stuff. So those guys are looking for affordable, replaceable, instruments. And that's why I hear if you go to Nashville, recently I was listening to the Tone Junkie podcast, and they're talking about how in Nashville, the two amps they see the most are Fender Hot Rod Deluxes and Kempers. Kempers makes sense for a lot of reasons, but Hot Rod Deluxe makes a lot of sense because it's affordable. You can find a used one on Craigslist, and they're easy to fix. Tubes are easy to replace. They're just kind of a workhorse backline amp. So that's if you're in a small band. Now, I can't think of a band in the last few years that has been a small band that all of a sudden is a huge band. I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but guitar-driven rock music is not doing well these days. But when you think about the big bands, really that came up under the old system, Foo Fighters, Radiohead, up until his death, you would have said Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Death Cab for Cutie, Weezer. These are rock bands. Coldplay from the 90s and the 2000s or further back for Tom Petty, who they're still touring, they're still gigging, and they tend to use nicer versions of what they came up with. So if they came up playing a cheap Fender Strat, they tend to have the nice version of the Fender Strat, or a vintage version, or a version that has been so gone over by their guitar tech or by a luthier or even by Fender or Gibson themselves that it's essentially a custom shop version. Jason Isbell's like one of the few guitar-driven guys to have kind of made it in the last few years, and if you watch his rig rundown, he has what looks like a Fender Deluxe reverb, but it was gone through by Dumble, so it's really a Dumble on the inside. I mean, so you can't assume that when you see a guitar player with a guitar or an amp that it's stock. In fact, it's probably been gone through by a tech, had certain tweaks done, and so it's really aftermarket custom. Who has nice stuff then? If the up-and-coming players are using affordable stuff and the guys who have made it, quote-unquote, are using hot, vintage stuff or the higher-end but mass-produced stuff, who is using boutique stuff? Now, there are a few guys who are known for using boutique stuff. The guy from Hall & Oates, I know, uses a TV Jones custom guitar. The guy from Rival Sons, Scott Holiday, is famous for using Cowers. But generally speaking, the guys who are using boutique or higher-end guitars are session players. Mason Stoops comes to mind, that guy, Mateus something or other, who I don't remember his name, it's something personal. Pete Thorne, these kind of guys who are session players tend to use higher end stuff, which makes sense. You go into a studio, it's a lot safer. You're actually making money, like as opposed to the guy that's trying to make it in a band and is making like next to nothing in these club shows or house shows. You're going as a session player, and you're going in and doing studio work. You're going in and producing somebody. You're going on tour with an established act. It's not a cool act necessarily. It's not, but it's an act that's making money. Because you're making money if you're touring with an older band that needs some session players to fill in the gaps where members aren't around anymore, or what have you. And in some cases, the members are so old they can't play their instruments anymore. But those guys make money. The same is true with church players. Church players, if you're an electrician or a software engineer, or just any number of guys who you own your own business, you have an outside income, and then, oh, by the way, you play music at church on the weekend, you have income to support your hobby, which is playing music, and your ministry, which is leading worship. The same is true for somebody who's a session player. They're buying tools the same way that a contractor or a carpenter or an electrician is buying tools. So there's an outside income. Now, here's the other truth, is there's a sponsorship. And a lot of these session guys are getting stuff comped to them, not because they're asking for it, by the way. Church players are horrible about emailing brands and trying to get stuff for free. Stop doing that. You're jerks if you do that. But these guys that are legitimately good, they are getting stuff comped to them. Maybe they're doing demo work on the side. Maybe they're getting a deal. Same way, honest truth, from what I hear, some of the bigger churches, they get a budget. If you think that the guys at Elevation Church are just all spending all this money, or Bethel or whatever, and they're not getting some sort of budget, I'm talking about the really high level guys, that they're not getting some sort of budget, or there's not a source that's coming to them for making it affordable to have some of that gear. That's just the reality of it. So, like I said at the beginning, this stereotype that you have to have really, really nice gear, that really nice, a Veritas or a Morgan amp or an Elliott guitar, that you have to have those things, to really have church praise and worship gear. It's just not true. It's a very small minority of church players that have gear like that. I'm going to do a video later on whether you should have gear like that or not, but the reason that you see those who do has to do with outside income, has to do with sponsorship, and lastly, it also has to do with venue. It's a lot safer to take a nice amp. Who's going to take a Morgan AC20 to a low-paying gig in a small bar where you might get beer spilled on it, it might get stolen, isn't it better just to bring a Vox AC10? So in churches, you have the ability to set up an amp room, and it's permanently mic'd and it's safe. And unless you're in some really hipster Acts 29 type church, you're probably not going to get you probably won't get beer spilled on it. If you're in a hipster Acts 29 church, though, somebody's beard might touch it. So that's kind of what's going on. Like I said, I'm going to do a video later about whether you should actually have gear like that, but that's kind of the economic reasons behind it. And so if you're feeling why don't I have gear like that? Well, it's really most players don't, so don't feel bad. All right, we'll see you later.